that can be given. He's talking about the kingdom of darkness. He's been given a place ascendant to every expression of evil. Evil hasn't been banished from our existence, but the one we worship has an authority over all things. And God placed all things under his feet and appointed him to be head over everything for the church, which is his body, the fullness of him who fills everything in every way. God gave him a name that's above every name, that every knee would bow, every tongue confess, and he appointed him to be the head over the church. Our allegiance is first and foremost to Jesus of Nazareth. It's so important. We seek him, we follow him imperfectly in our fractured ways, but we follow him. One of my big takeaways is I listened, because most of the weekend, or the week I've spent listening, I know that's hard to believe, but I did. It was so clear to me that we're going to have to learn to see in some new ways. You know, I earned a degree in history, and I've studied a good bit about the church and the history of the church beyond that, and how awakenings come and renewals come. And the challenge is that we tend to imagine that what God will do next will look like what we've seen God do in the past. That's a very normal expectation. It's familiar to us. It's comfortable to us. It's like home cooking or staying in a familiar space. It's not wrong. It's just typically not accurate. You know, when Martin Luther nailed his theses to the door and started a tremendous change in people of faith, it was really an outside of the system. It wasn't inside out. When the Wesley brothers and that whole Methodist revival began, they preached predominantly or frequently on horseback, sometimes standing on a saddle, riding hundreds and hundreds of miles. It didn't take place from within the structure. And it isn't that there aren't expressions of that, but God is moving in the most remarkable ways. And I watched and listened this weekend. It was remarkable to me, but we're going to have to learn to see. I really think trained to see in new ways. Everybody here has areas of expertise. You see things that other people don't see. I have a friend that's a world champion barbecue person. You know, some of you have thermometers. You know, and it's connected to your phone, and you can set a temperature, and the grill will do this, and your phone will chirp, and not my friend. He puts all the stuff on the grill, and he opens the grill, he walks up, and he pokes it with his finger. That burned my finger. And he goes, that's done. That's not done. I was thinking, how do you know? He said, I just know. Well, he's cooked thousands and thousands and thousands of pounds of stuff, or smoked it, or whatever he's doing to it. I just like to eat it. But he's a trained observer of what's happening. You know, I grew up, my dad was a vet when I was at home, and his expertise was at equine, but he treated horses, and his real expertise was lameness in horses. My brothers and I would get to go with him sometimes on calls, or they'd bring a horse to the clinic, and if they're expensive horses and they're lame, it's a big deal, and they need to know what the problem is. It sounds kind of simple, but not really. You know, and you've got a foot and an ankle and a knee and a hip, but horses have got 4 of them, and they're not very verbal. And shoulders, and so, you know, they say, my horse is lame, or he's not picking both feet up the same height. I'm like, yeah, that's unfortunate. So he'd always say the same thing. Well, walk the horse down that barn hall, or walk him down that path. And if that didn't, get on him and ride. I want to see you ride him. And he'd stand there and watch, and he'd get in the back, and he'd go get in the front. And if one of us was with him, usually he'd look over and say, so what do you think it is? And I never had the guts to say, but I think, well, they're not paying me. That's really up to you. But I was wise enough not to say that. So. But, you know, it took a lot of training to know whether it was an ankle or a knee or what the problem was, or how to finally get to that conclusion. And, you know, you have training. We have people in the building, they're video editors. They can look at a piece of video, and they'll look at a transition video like we just saw, and they'll go, you know, we should have gotten out of that 2 frames sooner. And I'm going like, what? Well, I don't know. Well, in the church, the people of God, we have to know how to recognize what God is doing. We have to have eyes to see, and we act like, well, that's obvious. No. We've been trained in some things. We know about an altar call and a confession of faith. Maybe we know about worship that we think is meaningful. One of the first things I had to learn when I started in ministry is how do you know if a community of people is healthy? Because our language doesn't help. How was church? Always wonderful. What do you mean? Well, the Spirit moved. How'd you know? Well, you could feel it. No, you may have just been hungry. I mean, it could have been about your emotions. That's not, I had to come to understand ways to recognize what was happening so that we could have conversation about it. And how do we recognize? We need God's help. We had a conversation, what's today? Is this Saturday? We had a conversation Friday morning about Israel. And we had two people that traveled from Israel to talk to us. And we had a man who works in the media. He's the editor-in-chief of Breitbart. I had a conversation with him earlier in the week, and he said, I'd like to come be a part of that conversation. And he wanted to talk about it based on what he understands. I mean, he's world-class at the news and the media and the conversations. In my imagination, that would have been a conversation fueled by pastors. But they're much more reluctant to have that conversation. We're having to learn to see in new ways. We had a conversation on the media last night, and I learned a great deal about spiritual things happening in our nation from sports reporters, editors of media outlets. They had some amazing insight and discernment about what's happening in our nation from a spiritual vantage point. And the courage to say it. Well, I didn't expect that. It's not their business. I prefer that be coming out of our theological seminaries. I mean, those are the places that we pay to train people to be spiritual leaders, right? That's how it happens. And I'm like, wow. And I'm listening to all this going, I got pages and pages of notes. I'm going to try to share some of it with you in a minute. But what I was conscious of is I've got to see in some new ways. And I would invite you to that. So, well, I've never seen that. No kidding, because what we've been doing isn't working. We've presided over one of the most precipitous declines of Christian influence in the history of the church. For all of our talk about safety and security, our lives aren't safer or more secure. Our children aren't safer or more secure.
pace. So TikTok is filling the gap, but you have to understand, you have to be looking at these folks that your kids are watching, see if they have credibility. Do they have designations? As I've spoken on the show, we have a YouTube channel, but I'm a certified financial planner. We have a real legitimate solid business behind us with expertise and studies behind us. And there are a lot of folks online. I'm not saying they're all bad, but some of them don't even have credentials. And quite frankly, everything we put out there gets archived and saved so that it gets reviewed by our compliance team. And there are a lot of situations on these social media platforms that is not happening.
Now, you mentioned a few steps that a person can take before they engage in some kind of risky financial behavior online through those methods of getting financial advice. What else can parents do to help their kids navigate this trend?
I think they should get involved and talk to their kids. Are they watching this kind of content? And if they are, maybe suggest watching it together and take a look at who is the person behind the advice that their child's getting, and maybe subsequently do a little research on them. See, what credentials do they have? What kind of studies have they done? Is there a greater business behind it? Where is this advice coming from? What's their motivation? Are they doing it simply because they have a partnership with a particular company and they're getting ad revenue? I think it really can open up an opportunity to be more social, not on the platform, but offline with our kids, and start that conversation early so they understand finances much earlier on.
Great advice. Thank you so much. As always, Lawrence Sprung, good to speak with you.
For the first time, the so-called Commodus Passage allows emperors to enter the arena and watch gladiator fights and other spectacles without mixing with crowds. Here's a closer look.
The passage was named after the Emperor Commodus, who lived from 180 to 192 AD.
This passage is now open to the public. It's the first time, and so they could appreciate what was being an emperor.
The corridor was discovered in the 19th century and linked to Commodus because historical chronicles say he survived an assassination attempt in an underground passage.
And this place was known as the Passage of Commodus. Commodus became very famous after the film The Gladiator because he liked to fight with the gladiators. So when the passage was discovered at the end of the 19th century, in the chronicles is said that Commodus had somebody tried to kill him in an underground passage. So this was very easy to make a match.
The Colosseum Archaeological Park said that it once had marble walls, which were later replaced with plaster decorated with landscapes. It also had stucco work showing mythological scenes on the vault and representations of arena spectacles, including bear fights and acrobats in niches at its entrance.
It was quite difficult to restore this passage because it's a very humid place. As we said, this was inside the foundation, so when they realized the passage, they had to cut lots of drainage passages, so it's very humid. And this is not very good for stuccos and frescoes.
Very damp conditions in the underground passageway have made conservation a struggle.
With a little effort of imagination and the help of a virtual reconstruction, the visitor will appreciate the decorations and the stucco, the frescoes, and the marbles that covered the walls that now we see a little ruined.
The corridor is shaped as an S, and archaeologists say the tunnel continues outside the arena, but it is still unknown where it leads. The passage will open to the public on October 27th.
Coming up, mysterious white powder mailed to the Epoch Times newspaper. Is this the latest threat against the media outlet by Chinese state actors? Our guest weighs in after the controversy.
This is NTD News Today, live from our global headquarters in New York City.
President Trump heading to the Middle East today. That's as a U.S. brokered peace deal between Israel and Hamas takes shape. He plans to greet Israeli hostages after they're released Monday morning, addressing the Israeli government and lead a peace summit in Egypt. He will be coming back Tuesday for a White House ceremony honoring the late Charlie Kirk, who was assassinated last month.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be there because I'll be going to, I'll go to Cairo. I think that's where we're going, as opposed to the place of the signing. And we have a lot of leaders from all over the world coming too. You know, they've been invited. And then I'm coming back, I believe it's Tuesday night, for Charlie Kirk, a friend of mine, a friend of all of ours, a friend of a lot of the people right here. And we're giving him the Presidential Medal of Freedom.
And with the government shutdown now in its 12th day, President Trump announced on Truth Social that he is directing Secretary of War Pete Hegseth to, quote, use all available funds to get our troops paid on October 15th. Trump did not identify the source for funding. A Pentagon official said about $8 billion slated for research and development would be used to pay troops if the shutdown continues after Wednesday. Trump urged Democrats to open the government, saying he will not allow them to, quote, hold our military